I'm only waving down because
Hi,
there's a logo on my screen.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, Bernice.
Yeah. Nick,
Michael, what?
Yes.
Michael, what's
you're
over
getting
here?
into competition with me here.
What's that?
The sartorial approach.
Sartorial.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean our emails?
No.
Hollywood. Is that the Hollywood Square?
Never mind. All right. Just we're going to get started because I think most of the people who are joining us are here. Hello, Janice. Hello, Max. Hello, Corby. Hi, everybody.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hi.
Was everyone able to access the source sheet that I prepared?
No.
I didn't see
No,
it.
I didn't
Didn't see it. Well,
Rabbi,
you may have to minimize this.
Rabbi.
Go back to the congregation page where it lists the courses, and it should have a link for whatever source sheet we have. If you can't find it, we'll cope, all right? Because I have
Rabbi,
yes.
this is Bob Kushner. I'm in on audio. I'm in on audio, as you can tell,
Okay.
and I'm registered, but I can't get in on video.
Yeah.
But I'm in on audio at the moment.
Okay.
Only.
So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna start by asking everyone to voluntarily mute yourself if you haven't already. I think the mute button is a great invention, and I was thinking about incorporating that into some of my other classes, the live classes, but I don't control the mute button. I can't mute all of you, but just mute yourselves so that we don't have any background noise, and hopefully everybody will be able to understand. And if you want to say something, just raise your hand or send me a note in the chat, and or if you're on the phone, just yell or something, okay? Whatever you think is going to work best. So the topic for the week when we read Tazria Mitzorah is going to be the very beginning of the Parsha, where it talks about childbirth, and it says, "And on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised." Right? Now, we know about circumcision in the Torah before that. Obviously, Abraham was circumcised. But this is the first indication that Brit Milah is a mitzvah for the entire Jewish people. Right? There's also the little episode with Moses, but we're going to bypass that for tonight. All right? So, the mitzvah of Brit Milah, right? If someone were to ask you, let's say, you have a non-Jewish friend with whom you conduct discussions about Judaism, they have an interest in Judaism, and they ask you, why do Jews circumcise their baby boys? What would you tell them? Anyone want to answer that? Yeah, Nick.
Because God said so.
Okay, so that's one reason, and that would be the easiest and quickest write-off. God said so. Well, yeah, I can't argue with that unless you're Jewish, but
well, yeah.
But we do, right? So yeah, it's God said so. But let's say that your non-Jewish friend goes the extra mile and asks you, well, okay, but why did God ask you to do that? What would you say?
Isn't that one of those mitzvahs that doesn't have a reason?
Well, that could be. And that is, I mean, it may have a reason, but we're not told. Or maybe it's one of those things that isn't reasonable per se.
Okay.
It says to separate us from them. Okay, possibly. I can think of other ways that would be more effective and more public.
We also know that contracts during that time period, contracts were made in a way of separating, and that most of the time animals or birds, separating them and walking through together. So this was to signify the seriousness of the covenant.
Anthropologically, maybe we got it from the Egyptians.
Yeah, but that's probably not going to satisfy this fictional friend of yours who's asking. Yes, Nick.
I read somewhere that a human being's level of vitamin K and prothrombin, I think it was, which is an anticoagulant, are the highest on the 8th day that they are at any time in their life. So I would take that as a very interesting coincidence if they don't, want to look at it from a divine information.
Yes, I've heard this too, and I've had Mohalim and physicians tell me this. It doesn't really address the question of why do it in the first place. Right? It just, it does answer why on the 8th day. But, it doesn't tell us anything about why we should bother. Right?
It's a sign of the covenant in our flesh.
It's a covenant in the flesh. Okay? So there are two questions I could ask about that. One is, why do I need that covenant in the flesh? I mean, yeah, okay, so, I could just make a little cut on my arm here, and that, that wouldn't that be sufficient? Circumcision, that's kind of personal, right? That's one thing. And then the other thing is, this is a covenant that if you read it that way, only includes half the Jewish people.
The ones who are more lustful and need to be restrained?
Oh, so there's an interesting approach that many people have taken, most especially beginning in the 20th century. The idea that men need to be controlled. Women, of course, are more naturally virtuous. You don't see the expression alpha female, right? It's only the alpha male, right?
You never met my grandmother. There's no way.
There are passages in the Zohar that are comparable to that. So I don't have to have met your grandmother.
Rabbi, one question.
However, the general approach here is that the alpha male needs to be tamed somehow, and that this has something to do with that, right? So that's a theory that has been thrown out, but remarkably, I have not found any source before the 20th century that said that alpha males needed to be tamed. So if in fact that's one of the reasons, I just, I would have thought that somebody would have come up with it a lot sooner.
Max said he has a question.
I'm sorry?
Max said he has a question.
Okay, Max, please.
Hey, Rabbi, one couple questions. The first one, the circumcision is in one literally source. Is in the Sefer Yetzirah, in the book Sefer Yetzirah.
Sefer Yetzirah, yes. What
In
about
that,
it?
in that book, describe the circumcision ritual, right?
It is what?
The circumcision ritual.
Okay, what about the ritual?
In that book, because Abraham make the circumcision for himself, and he is practicing in that book, the Sefer Yetzirah.
Well, according to those who believe that Sefer Yetzirah was written by Abraham. Okay, now I know what you're talking about. That is widely regarded today as a noble fiction. The idea that this mystical book, which first appears somewhere between the 2nd century and the 8th century, was written by Abraham. That hypothesis appears in the Talmud. Is it factual? Not as far as I can tell.
Second question, Rabbi. Rabbi, the human being is the perfect creation. Why?
That's not what my wife says.
Why do we have to do the circumcision? Because God have been created like a perfect. Why we have to get a circumcision? We have to modify the creation of God?
But we do. We have to make grain into bread.
So actually, Anne anticipates the answer, or at least a part of the answer to your question, Max, which we will get to in the text, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Okay. Someone else have a question, comment? Anna, I sort of see a question in your face, but I can't tell for sure.
There's not a question. I was actually cheating. I was Googling, why do Jews circumcise their sons? I'm going to have to admit that.
All right, Anna. I'm going to make you stay late tonight. That's.
Oh, no.
I'm thinking this conversation's about 60 years too late for me.
Well, and later than that for me, and for most of the gentlemen on this call. So here, let me share with you the first answer. Those of you who have the texts, you'll follow along. If you don't, hopefully you'll be able to catch the drift. This is the text from Midrash Tanchuma Lech Lecha. What is the secret that he will only reveal to those who revere him? This refers to the circumcision. God revealed its mystery only to Abraham, of whom it is written, you, Abraham, revere God. That's what God says to Abraham after he brings Isaac to the mountain. So according to this midrash, the only person who got to know the meaning of the mitzvah of Brit Milah was Abraham. Why? Because he had a special relationship with God. He revered God in a way that no one else did. And therefore, he got to know. The rest of us, unfortunately, we are stuck. Right? That's it. We don't get to know. There's a reason, but we don't get to know what it is. That's what this part of Midrash Tanchuma says. Right? And maybe part of the reason for this is that this information is a little volatile. Right? Now, how could it be volatile? Well, maybe if people thought they understood the reason for it, they might not be willing to do it. they might say, as many Jews have said over time in relation to different mitzvot, they might say, well, I can accomplish that by doing something else, right? I can affirm my covenant, I'll just make that little scratch on my arm, that instead of Brit Milah. That seems a lot more sensible, right? So, well, that would be one approach. There's a reason, but most of us mortals don't get to know what it is, right? So, and that's a little bit different from what you suggested before, which is there isn't a reason. It's a mitzvah without a reason.
May I say something?
Many of us bristle at the idea that we should do a particular mitzvah just because it's a mitzvah. I may not know the reason for it, but I want to know that there is a reason for it. Hey, Nick.
Rabbi, I thought that the specific location of what needed to be circumcised really wasn't explained in the Torah, that the writings of the rabbis had to explain what it was. Is that correct?
It does not specifically say in the Torah the purpose of Brit Milah. It does talk about it as a sign of the covenant, but it doesn't say a whole lot more than that.
Does it say the flesh of his foreskin?
The flesh of his foreskin. Shelley.
Well, if you wanted to make a deal with somebody, you want to have some way to seal the deal, so to speak. God is everybody's father. Abraham's our first forefather. So if Abraham could understand God's explanation well enough to do it to himself in advanced age and then do it to his sons, that's a pretty powerful statement. So I think as a practical matter, we accept it's a sign of the covenant. Abraham may know why that particular sign or why God feels we need a sign of the covenant, but it was good enough for Abraham, so to speak, and it was good enough for him to transmit to his sons. So he sets the example for us to do it. Had Abraham not done it, he said, no, I don't think so, God. That doesn't really do it for me. We wouldn't have a circumcision. So I think it's reasonable that God would tell Abraham that perhaps he had to convince him, or perhaps they had a special relationship so he would let him know. But it worked. Abraham did it to himself, and he did it to his children, and we're continuing to do it. That's pretty powerful. It's like Indians becoming blood brothers in spades, so to speak.
The interesting thing, though, Shelley, is that even though the mitzvah did have a lot of staying power, it seemed to have disappeared for a while.
In Egypt?
Yeah. And, we're given to believe that at some point this mitzvah needed to be re-emphasized.
I wonder around the time of Jesus, I don't know if this is true or not, it's something I'd heard, that one of the last straws separating Jews from Gentiles is Gentiles didn't want to be circumcised. That was sort of the last straw. Is that a myth or something I made up, or what?
No, I don't think it's something that you made up. The fact that Christians did not require circumcision may have been one of the things that added to its popularity.
Also made one of the things for Jews to re-emphasize, to be sure they distinguish themselves from Christians.
Yes, yes. Someone else had a comment or a question? Yeah, Larry.
Yes. I think it's good to have an inquiring mind, but there's other places in the Torah where we're given commandments without any reason or explanation, such as some of the laws of kashrut, not the later ones the rabbis imposed, like chicken is meat, but basically what we can.
Use this where it says click here.
I'm sorry?
Larry, I'm having a hard time picking you up. Everyone else, if you're not speaking, could you please mute yourself if you haven't done so already? Give it a try again, Larry. You have to unmute yourself.
Yes. Yeah, I was unmuted. Is this
better?
I'm closer to the computer.
Yeah.
Okay. What I started to say is, while all of us, I'm sure, believe in inquiring minds, there's some things we just don't question in the Torah. For example, the laws of kashrut, not the ones that the rabbis imposed, like chicken is meat, but the ones that are actually several times in the Tanakh, in the actual Torah. We don't eat certain things, and there's no reason. We can speculate. Maybe there's a midrash or 20 midrashim, I don't know. But there's just certain rules that we're supposed to obey without question. And while it's intellectually stimulating to guess what the answer is, there may not be an answer. It just is what it is.
Well, may I comment on that?
I'm sorry, hold on, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to start with Parshat Shmini, where I could have maybe not convinced you of the reason, but at least given you some evidence as to the reasons for some of the laws of kashrut as they were described in Parshat Shmini. In any event, I think, again, Jews are very good at arguing, and not too many people take for granted something just because the Torah says so. I may wrestle with it. I may accept it in the end, but I'm definitely interested in what arguments there have been about it. Yes, Anne.
I forgot whether it was Devarim or where it is, but it says the king should not multiply horses and he should not multiply wives. And to cause the reason was given, so the commentary says, Solomon felt free to ignore those two commandments because he felt they didn't apply to him, and therefore he went astray and he should have done them. And that means that it's not such a good idea to give reasons, because as you said earlier, people like to get around it by doing something else.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. I mean, there is a whole history of this, and kind of a dialogue, if you will, among the rabbis in different ages about the need to give reasons for the mitzvah. If you lived in a place or an age where the approach to Judaism was more philosophical, Judaism is a good religion. It's a religion that teaches truth. It's a religion that makes us better people. If that's, the direction that most people are going, then they're going to say, well, then there are reasons for the mitzvot, and let's figure out what they are. There is, of course, a danger in that, and that danger, I mean, you describe an example from it in the rabbinic period. It was a major factor in the development of Kabbalah because the Kabbalists lived in a time when a lot of Jewish thought had been dominated by Greek and Arabic philosophers. And Maimonides was, the classic example of someone who was, deeply Jewish, but extremely influenced by philosophy from different quarters. And so people began to say, well, if this is the reason for the mitzvah, I don't need to do it. I can accomplish that by doing something else. I don't need to put on tefillin every morning. I'll just offer a deeply personal prayer and, approach God that way. Well, if you let that go on long enough, and pretty soon people stop putting on tefillin, and people stop keeping kosher, and people stop doing many of the mitzvot. And it becomes essentially a Jewish free-for-all. I don't think it's so necessary to have Shabbos on Saturday. Everybody around me is they have a Sabbath on Sunday. I can do that too. And then everybody is making Shabbos for themselves, and there is no coherent community. So that, this is an age-old problem in Judaism. Yes, Shelley.
That's one of the beauties of circumcision. You pretty much have it done to you when you're 8 days old. So you're already invested, so to speak.
And you don't put up much of an argument.
You don't put up much of an argument, except for the very first Jew to be circumcised.
Yes.
Depending on how Abraham heard the instructions, my reaction was, thank God I'm not 8 days old. And God might have gone to explain, wait a minute, you happen to be the first Jew, so you're going to have to do it at your age. That's when the explanation may have come to the forefront, you should pardon the expression. Abraham said, wait a minute, I thought this was for 8-day-old kids, not for me. So God said, let me explain to you why you have to do this.
Yes. 99, huh?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let me go on to the next midrashic text, which is really, in some ways, kind of a commentary on the previous one. Previous one said, God revealed his mystery only to Abraham. Right? So this text says, God said to Abraham, enough for the servant to become equal to his master. This is comparable to a king whose beloved was very rich. He had a beloved friend. He was very wealthy. And the king said, what can I give him? He's already plenty wealthy. Therefore, I will gird him with my own adornments. Probably, gave him, the scepter.
Hello?
It's like he's frozen. He'll come back.
Danny, you dropped out.
Can't hear you.
Of all people to lose.
I guess God didn't like that midrash.
Shelley, can you hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
I hear you.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's just the rabbi that's frozen.
I just got disconnected for a moment. I have no idea why.
Welcome back.
We think it has something to do with what you were saying.
That could be it. Whoever is running Zoom is probably on the lookout for unorthodox teachings. So there we are. So in other words, God has treated most of us very differently than he treated Abraham. Yes, there's a certain amount of shared responsibility in God's world. We have the status of being kind of the junior partner. Abraham, maybe a little more than a junior partner. Right? If God is the rabbi, Abraham is like the associate rabbi or the next to senior rabbi. Okay, someone had a comment? Okay, so let me go on to the next text. This is from Midrash Shmot Rabbah, which begins with a riff on a verse from Psalm 26, which says, the Lord of hosts, he is the Melech HaKavod, the King of glory. Remember the song for Sunday? Right? Those of you who come on Sundays, you know what I mean. The Lord Adonai Tzvaot Hu Melech HaKavod Selah. Right? The Lord of hosts, he is the King of glory. So this is attributed to Solomon because it's comparable to one of Solomon's prayers. So it says, why did Solomon call God the King of glory? Because he assigns glory to those who revere him. And the proof is, one must not ride on the horse or sit on the throne of a mortal king. You know, that's like, taking his place. Yet God placed Solomon on his throne. As it says in the book of Chronicles, then Solomon was placed on the throne of the Lord as king. Right? Solomon had a special place there. One must not make use of the scepter of a mortal king, but God handed his scepter to Moses. Well, you know where that comes from. Moses took the rod of God in his hand. God's, Moses' staff is given specifically from God. Continues, one must not wear the crown of a mortal king, but God will one day place his crown on Messiah the King. At least we do have a tradition that that's what's going to happen. So, okay, Messiah is, in our version, a mortal person. Okay? One of what is the crown of God? A very fine gold. And it says, you set a crown of fine gold on his head. One must not put on the robes of a mortal king, but Israel wears the mantle of God. What is the mantle of God? Strength, as it says, and we all know this verse from Psalm 29, the Lord will give strength unto his people. The Lord will bless his people with peace. Adonai oz li'amo yitain, Adonai yavarech et amo v'shalom. Continuing, one must not call himself by the name of a mortal king, Caesar or Augustus. For if one will assume his name, he will be executed for treason. Yet God called Moses by his very own name, as it says, behold, and this from the beginning of chapter 7 of Exodus, I have set you in God's stead to Pharaoh. Right. So, one of the interesting things about this particular midrash is the mantle of God is strength. Okay? But, with strength, for God, it's also about restraining one's use of strength, right? And so that's how we have to look at it too. We aspire to strength, but we also need to manage that and control it. Right? So there, here, the thrust of this teaching is that we have to be dedicated to certain positive purposes. And if we do that, then, we earn a certain partnership with God, just as certain individuals of note are honored by having certain things from God. Okay? Comments or questions up to here? Yes, Nick.
No, I was scratching my nose. I didn't have a question. I'm very fidgety, so just gotta ignore me a little bit. I could barely sit still anyway.
I heard a Hasidic rabbi say that a stone is happy to be a stone, a vegetable is happy to be a vegetable, an animal is happy to be an animal, but a human wants to be God. And that's okay because we can be godly rather than being God. But that's what we want. We want to be God.
Well, all well and good, but we still haven't got a full answer to our question of why circumcision. So let's go on a little bit. When God would speak to Abraham, this is from Midrash Tanchuma, when God would speak to Abraham prior to the circumcision, he would fall on his face. However, after the circumcision, not only was Abraham able to stand before God, as it says, and he was still standing, he was even able to remain seated. Because it says, the beginning of chapter 18, at the beginning of Parsha Vayera, when Abraham is sitting in his tent and the angels are going to come to him, and God appeared to him at Elonei Mamre, and he was sitting.
Wow.
Right? So this is, part of God's gift to us is a certain amount of kavod, a certain amount of honor. Right? And so, we even have something resembling a divine self. The reason that I mention this here is that maybe certain mitzvot are meant to help us achieve a certain divine stature so that we can stand face to face with God. We need reverence, like Abraham needed reverence, but that's, maybe to protect us from some of the dangers involved with the relationship with God. I just want, Lenny.
Yeah, a midrash that I've read about circumcision, why we do it, is that a child's circumcision is considered similar to the sacrifice, to a sacrifice, since the child is being brought under the wings of the Shekhinah. And that's another reason why the child we wait 8 days, is that the child has to live through one Shabbat so that he can be sanctified and elevated by its Kedusha. That's what I'm saying here.
Okay,
and the infant,
very good, Lenny.
The infant is then fit to be a korban for Hashem.
I didn't bring that particular midrash, but something similar that starts out with the idea that one has to have one Shabbat before Brit Milah, and that's why it's on the 8th day. Right. So I'm going to come back to that a little bit later.
Okay, well, I missed the first few minutes, so I don't know if you already covered it.
It's all right. Glad you're here. Just, one more teaching that places this in a kind of a similar light to what we've seen so far. A teaching from Rabbi David Aaron, which says the Hebrew term for circumcision is lamul, from milah, lamul. But the word mul also means to be opposite or across, right? Suggesting that we can come face to face with God. And this level of mutual respect is the cornerstone of all love, right? So that's maybe a useful summary of what we've seen so far. Now I want to turn to another midrash, which is a very well-known text, and some of you may have seen this, and this will also tie into what Lenny mentioned. it is a conversation, probably not a real conversation, but a rabbinically imagined conversation. But it tells you a lot about both of the characters who participate in it, at least in the mind of the rabbis. One of them is Rabbi Akiva. We all know Rabbi Akiva, great Jewish hero. The other one is a wicked Roman general named Turnus Rufus.
Yeah.
You heard of this guy.
I got it right in front of me, Rabbi.
Oh, you do? Great.
I got
okay,
the whole story. I got the whole story right in front of me.
He's a bad man, Lenny. Don't get too close to him, okay? So here's what it says.
But I love
taunts Rabbi Akiva and asks, whose deeds are nicer, God's or those of human beings? Rabbi Akiva says the deeds of people are nicer. Turnus Rufus says, but how can that be? Can a human being create the world? Rabbi Akiva says, don't make a comparison with things that people are incapable of doing. Ask about something people can also do. And immediately Turnus Rufus asked about Brit Milah. And Rabbi Akiva said, I knew you were going to ask me about that. And that's why I responded to you that human deeds are greater than those of God. And so he brought some stalks of wheat and some cookies and said, which of these are the works of God and which were made by people? In other words, would you rather eat a stalk of wheat or a delicious cookie? Right? And who's responsible for the cookie? God made the wheat, but we improved on it. Right? So, Turnus Rufus says, so if God wanted Brit Milah so much, why aren't boys born circumcised? And Rabbi Akiva said, I could have just as easily asked you why people are born with the umbilical cord still attached. But I will answer your question anyway. God gave us Brit Milah to teach us that the commandments are given to us to perfect ourselves. Right? So Turnus Rufus, picks this fight with Akiva. But, we don't treat circumcision as a disfigurement. We're given our bodies, but we're also given Torah, which tells us how to care for and elevate ourselves and the world. And he wasn't necessarily trying to convince the Romans to start circumcising their boys. Right? It's a story that is meant for the Jews. Right? It's a way of shoring up our commitment to the mitzvah. But it adds a layer of meaning. It says the world is a work in progress. And we're God's partners in that. And Brit Milah is just one step along that path. So I also had here for you Rabbi Jonathan Sachs's piece, which is really all about the story of Turnus Rufus. Yes, Shelley.
That idea has medical implications. There's another midrash about the rabbis running across a man on the road who has a terrible headache and won't take treatment for it because he said, if God intended for me to have this headache and for me to get well, I would just get well. It'd be inappropriate for me to take any medicine for it because that doesn't come from God. So he explains to him there how you make bread from wheat, and if we just left the wheat as it is, you couldn't have any bread. And if you didn't investigate treatments for disease, you would not be fulfilling God's mission for you. So it's a pretty powerful statement that you have to do your part in the world to do what God wants you to do as instructed by the Torah.
Yeah, right. And this also ties into something that some of you at least have probably heard me say, but one of the big differences between Judaism and Christianity is in Christianity, the idea of playing God is like, you know, you can't do that. In Judaism, we're expected to be co-creators with God. Right? We're partners with God in the creative process. We take the wheat and we make it into cookies. So, you know, we like that.
It makes for inquisitive minds for scientists, doctors, musicians, poets, because we want to understand the way of the world. We're supposed to do that. It's not just we're more curious than the next fellow. It's part of the Torah DNA. It's been very helpful to me for understanding medicine and why we pursue what we pursue in medicine, as opposed to let things run their course.
Yes. Okay. So, you know, Jonathan Sachs talks about, you know, the building of the Mishkan as a parallel to God's creation of the universe. Those of you who are able to access the text, you'll see the whole thing, but I'm just taking a few bits and pieces. It says, so, you know, Genesis begins and Exodus ends with stories of creation. The first by God, the second by the Israelites. The eighth day is when we celebrate the human creation, the human contribution to creation. And that is also why circumcision takes place on the eighth day. Right? Every human being bears God's image, but it takes a human act to signal that a male Jewish child has entered the covenant. That is why it takes place on the eighth day, to emphasize that the act that symbolizes entry into the covenant is a human one, just as it was when the Israelites at the foot of Mount Sinai said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, we will obey. So he talks about the mutuality of the specific covenant God made first with Abraham, then with Moses and the Israelites, etc. And he says that, you know, and we now begin to understand the depth of the conversation between Rabbi Akiva and Turnus Rufus. For the Romans, the Greeks, and the ancient world generally, the gods were to be found in nature. Right? In Judaism, God is beyond nature, and his covenant with us takes us beyond nature also. So for us, not everything natural is good. War is natural. Conflict is natural. The violent competition to be the alpha male is natural. Jews and others inspired by the God of Abraham believe, as Katharine Hepburn said to Humphrey Bogart in The African Queen, that nature, Mr. Allnut, is what we are put in this world to rise above. So the Romans thought circumcision was strange because it was unnatural, right? But this is more, you know, going beyond nature, and that's the advance of Judaism. And why is it symbolized in the act of circumcision? Because if Darwin was right, then the most primal of all human instincts is to seek to pass on one's genes to the next generation. That is the strongest force of nature within us. Circumcision symbolizes the idea that there is something higher than nature. And he goes on to say that the Abrahamic covenant was based on sexual fidelity, the sanctity of marriage, and the consecration of the love that brings new life into the world. It is a rejection of the ethic of the alpha male. Right? So that is, I think it may be a helpful answer about why circumcision. Anyone have a comment on that or a reaction to that?
Well, I've read that this mitzvah is to grant us the merit of we get the merit for doing the mitzvah, and elevates us. And, there's another midrash that's, I don't want to say it's far out there, but it talks about the merit of the mitzvah, of the bris. It says that even if a Jew should be devoid of Torah knowledge and mitzvahs, his milah alone possesses the power of protecting him from the severe punishment of Gehinnom. Now, I don't know about that.
I'm sure that even
what do you think of that, Rabbi?
Has managed to earn Gehinnom.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said that even someone who is circumcised has managed to earn their way to Gehinnom.
Okay.
So, yeah, but that there is some special merit in circumcision is, a frequent theme in these in discussion of the mitzvah. Okay. The next text from Samson Raphael Hirsch, who 19th century German rabbi, talks about the fact that the mitzvah has to be performed in the daytime. It's done on the 8th day, even if it's on Shabbat or any other day. Right? And we have elsewhere discussed how Israel not only was added to the 7 works of the world's creation as the 8th, but quite actually stands as the visible bearer of the reminder of the creator of the world that the Sabbath of creation was meant to be. Israel accordingly exists as the 8th for the 7th. The meaning of Israel, the 8th, lies entirely in the keeping of the Sabbath, the 7th, and so has the Sabbath as its sole bearer among humanity has maintained Israel. Accordingly, by the performance of Brit Milah on the 8th day, the whole Abrahamic bond with God is demonstrated in its mission for the Sabbath. It is the Sabbath, the principle of God being master of humanity and the world, which the Sabbath teaches, demonstrated by such a sign of the covenant as receiving a new recruit to the house of Abraham. So it is perfectly understandable when the 8th day falls on Shabbat, the circumcision is nevertheless done on that day. In other words, this goes back to what one of you said earlier about a child having to go through a Shabbat before they could be introduced into the covenant. Okay?
Rabbi, one question.
Yes.
I want to know, because the real covenant with Abraham, it was 99 years old, right?
Yes.
And the babies is 8 days, right? My question is, the real covenant is for the parents of this baby, or this is the covenant for the baby?
I would argue that it's both. It is a statement on the part of the parents that they are committed to raising this child within the covenant, right? And it is a sign to certify, if you will, the status of that child as a bearer of the covenant. So it's both.
Okay.
This is highly anecdotal, but in my observation, families that do not bother to have their sons circumcised generally don't raise those children to be particularly Jewish. Now, the reverse is not always true, of course.
Rabbi, another question is, you make a little commentary about the circumcision help to the, try to say like a control of the sex practice, right? You try to tell that one, or maybe I hear bad.
That it is a way of sanctifying a lifetime of sexual fidelity.
Okay. I don't think so, but I respect your opinion. But
Well,
I think
I want you to know I didn't say that. Okay, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said it. So go argue with him.
Yeah. No. This is a mental practice because the idea is to move the different opinions. I respect. No problem for that. But my commentary is about that one because I don't think so that it produced that one. I think that Abraham tried to repeat or something ritual who is under the purification ritual to go to the mysticism to communicate with God. This is the real idea, the purification to go to God, to sacrifice.
It's a purification ritual for Abraham.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So, and maybe if that's the case, it is there is a similar feeling that the child also requires some kind of purification. Ani, you had a comment.
Yeah, I do have a comment, and it actually comes from my Jungian training. There's this concept that Carl Jung often speaks about. It's something called the opus contra naturam. It's the work against nature that creates consciousness. And so that's what I got from what you were saying from Jonathan Sachs, that one of the reasons for this ritual is that it's one of these opus contra naturams and can help in this creation of consciousness. Because it's not just, we're not just going along with nature, we're actually doing something that's not completely natural.
Yes.
And sometimes, we talk about the incest prohibition in the same way, that one of the things that emerges out of this, the incest taboo is consciousness, because there's something that we can't do, and that creates, image and imagination and consciousness. But I hear you talking about the different things that this ritual does, including create a sense of identity among Judaism. And it seems like there's been an evolution over time as to the reasons why this ritual continues to be important.
Yeah, there is some evolution in that. I want to make mention quickly of the text from Yalkut Yehuda, which says essentially exactly what was said before about the purpose of the circumcision being on the 8th day, so that the child should pass a Sabbath day before the circumcision. By means of Shabbat, he is sanctified and thus becomes fit to enter the holiness of Israel through Brit Milah. And this and a lot of the texts that we have seen leave a rather large hole when it comes to discussions about women being part of the covenant. But that is, a whole nother matter. Shelley, you had a comment, and then Nick.
Well, two things. The Torah is a lot about making distinctions between heaven and earth, Jews and non-Jews, lightness and dark. And certainly circumcising your children would be a distinction perhaps from other people. I don't know if circumcision was practiced among other people during Abraham's time.
It was.
It was, but throughout history, it's been used as a way of finding Jews. For example, there's a movie called Europa.
Yes.
And the whole movie is about the kid essentially trying to not be caught and identified as a Jew. And the entire movie is trying to hide the fact that he's circumcised, trying to pin his foreskin back together. So it's one way of making a distinction between Jews and non-Jews, which is obviously blurred since so many other people are circumcised. But the other thing it may do is related to what the rabbi just said, which make a distinction between genders. That, for better or worse, a man is born with a penis and it has to be circumcised. Women are considered, I guess, naturally circumcised. What popped, it's funny you picked on Anna. I was thinking of Steve too and penis envy. But, I wonder if there was such a thing as circumcision envy, which might be something that occurs among, wait for it, non-Jews. It's just an intriguing idea
that's a new idea to me, that non-Jews had circumcision.
I think new to Freud also.
That if you dare. But it is sort of a very distinctive mark that distinguishes Jews from other people. I mean, other people may choose to circumcise themselves, but if you're going to be a Jew, you must circumcise yourself unless there's some medical reason not to. Even people Abraham's age, if they choose to convert to Judaism, they must circumcise themselves in some fashion. Right. So it's a rather major distinction between Jews and other people, and that could have been one of the intents to do, just like we keep kosher. That's a major distinction.
That one aspect of kashrut, and certainly one aspect of circumcision, is it sets us apart. Nick, I'm going to leave it to you.
I was told once that women are born twice as holy as men. It's something had to do with the mikvah. Like if you give birth to a male child versus a female child, the number of times you have to go to the mikvah. I can't remember it 100%.
Yeah, the number of days, for purification after the birth of a female child.
So if a woman's born with more holiness, maybe that's why she doesn't have to do this physical act.
Yeah. Well, I have heard that too. But once again, let me tell you, I am not familiar with a source prior to the 20th century that suggests that. I'm not aware of anything in the Talmud or the Midrash that suggests that this is the reason why women don't have to be circumcised. I think the idea that women might be holier than men is a relatively new invention, possibly even late 20th century. I don't know. Okay, let me, since we're about at the end of our time, let me leave you with one other teaching I wanted to share with you, which has nothing to do with circumcision, but it's really about the fact that, very often we read these two Torah portions together, Tazria and Metzora. So this is from Rabbi Mark Angel, a contemporary Orthodox rabbi. The word Tazria comes from Zera, which means seed. So Tazria represents fertility, growth, development, the forces in our lives that help us to be stronger and more creative and productive. Metzora includes the word tsar, which means narrow, represents constriction, limitation, right? Represents the forces that kind of restrict our freedom somewhat and even our movements and perhaps even our thoughts. And so we have Tazria and Metzora because these two elements go together. Because life is composed of ups and downs, growth spurts and plateaus, creativity and suppression. I just thought that was an interesting thought for Tazria Metzora for this week and wanted to share it with you. And I'll mention one other thing. I have a copy of an article which was, I think, in the foreword, or no, it was in the Jewish Week of New York. And the title of the article is it safe to perform a bris during the coronavirus crisis? If anyone is interested in reading that, please send me an email and I'll send you the link to it. So thank you very much for coming tonight. Wish you all a good Shabbos And hopefully see you next week. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
Thank you.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.